My name is Erin Lawson, I'm 30. And the night my mother went on Facebook to celebrate that I'd finally moved out, I was sitting on the floor of my new one-bedroom apartment, eating cold fried rice out of a takeout container. I opened the app, and her post was pinned right at the top of my feed, already taking off. Dinner for two again at last. No more feeding a parasite. Should have left years ago. Underneath, the thumbs-up count was climbing past 2,000. Strangers reacted with laughing faces like they knew anything about me. My Aunt Carla jumped in first, commenting, "Is this the same Erin who bawled when Target said no at 24? Some people never grow up." She was talking about one job interview, like that single rejection summed up my entire life. My stepdad, Tom. We added a collage. My old bedroom, clothes and boxes everywhere because I'd been working and packing. Next to the same room now, my desk dragged out, shelves torn off the wall, and a giant TV plunked in with a gaming console. His caption, "From trash heap to man cave in 24 hours, finally got our house back." My little sister Chloe tagged all her friends and wrote, "PSA. This is your future if you date creative guys who live on their computer." Half the time I'd been working, not gaming, but the joke fit the story they liked. I scrolled through every reaction, every punchline, every stranger cheering on the narrative that I was some lazy adult child who had finally stopped freeloading off her poor, long-suffering parents. None of them knew the house they were gloating from was legally mine, that my grandmother had paid it off long before I was born, that for years I had been quietly transferring money every month to people who never once treated me like an adult. I didn't clap back. I didn't post a rage thread. I didn't call anyone. I saved every screenshot, closed the app, and let them enjoy their little victory lap. If you think that post was just a joke, wait until you see what happened when I decided to tell the internet the whole story. One screenshot and one boring legal detail turned their funny status into the most expensive joke my family has ever made. To understand that night, you have to know how we got there. I grew up in a sun-bleached, 2-story house in Henderson, just outside Las Vegas. I am one of those suburbs where every driveway looks the same and every neighbor has seen you take the trash out in slippers at least once. My grandmother bought that house decades before I was born and paid it off one overtime shift at a time, sorting mail at the post office. When I was 23, she died. A few weeks later, we sat in a cramped lawyer's office while he read her will. That was the first time I heard my full name, Erin Marie Lawson, read out like it meant something heavy. The house, the one my parents had always called our home, left to me, not to my mom, Michelle, not to my stepdad, Tom, to me. The attorney even explained why in that slow, careful tone they use when they know it's going to land badly. My grandmother, he said, didn't trust Tom with money. He had a habit of borrowing and not quite paying people back. Before she smoothed her expression over like she'd put on a mask, Tom laughed too loudly and said, "It's all family anyway. Paperwork's just paperwork." I was 23, raw from losing the only person who ever told me I was brilliant without adding, "if only you'd just," at the end. So when my mom suggested nothing had to change, I didn't argue. She and Tom would keep handling the bills. I could stay while I figured things out, and life could go on like before. A few months later, she slid an envelope across the kitchen table and called it a grown-up step. She said I should start contributing $450 a month toward the house, utilities, groceries, to teach me responsibility. On paper, it sounded fair. I was working part-time at a coffee shop and picking up tiny freelance jobs, so I agreed. The part no one said out loud. I was now paying rent on a house that, in the eyes of the county, belonged to me, while the adults who constantly complained about money lived there for free. That Target story Carla loved so much. It was my big failure moment. At 24, I'd applied for a junior design job at Target Corporate. Mock-ups, branding, entry-level stuff. But at HQ, not stocking shelves. I wanted it too much. I stayed up all night redesigning sample layouts, rehearsing answers, trying to look like someone who belonged in a glass tower. When the rejection email came, I sat in my car behind the store and cried for 20 minutes before I went in for my shift. Mom must have told Carla, because from then on, it was the running family joke. Every Thanksgiving, every birthday, Remember when Erin cried over Target like it was Yale? Always followed by laughter. From that point on, anything I tried was a joke first and an attempt second. While they were laughing, I was teaching myself web design and digital marketing online. I took any gig I could find, building basic sites for local salons, writing captions, and planning posts for restaurants that didn't understand hashtags. I sat at a cheap desk in my disaster of a room until 2 in the morning, tweaking layouts, A/B testing email subject lines, scheduling campaigns. From the hallway, it looked like gaming. From my side of the screen, it was work. If I mentioned a client call, my mom would say, "Oh, another pretend job?" Tom would ask if I'd finally applied at the distribution center so I could get a real paycheck. Chloe would tell her friends right in front of me, "She just plays with Photoshop all day." Every month, $450 left my account labeled house. On top of that, I bought most of my own groceries, clothes, and equipment. If I ever reminded them that legally the house was in my name, Tom shut it down with, "You live under my roof. You live by my rules." Like the will was a story I'd made up. The longer it went on, the quieter I got. Explaining myself every time I sent an invoice or signed a contract felt pointless. It was easier to let them believe I was a lazy homebody than to argue over every project. So I built my career in silence, one client at a time. Retainer work replaced one-off jobs. A cafe I did a logo for recommended me to their supplier, who recommended me to a small clothing brand, who introduced me to an online retailer. I went from begging people to pay me $300 for a full website to billing $2,000 for a strategy package and having them say, "We'll wire the deposit today." The first month I made more than my mom and Tom combined. I stared at the total on my banking app, then walked into the kitchen and poured cereal while Mom complained to Chloe that kids these days just want to be influencers. They had no idea the girl they thought was playing on the computer was filing quarterly taxes and maxing out a Roth IRA. Around then, I started dating Ethan. We met at a friend's birthday bar crawl. He sold SUVs at a dealership, wore collared shirts a size too tight, and cracked jokes about sales quotas. He liked that I did creative stuff. On our third date, he asked where I lived. I said, "With my parents, in Henderson." I watched his face flicker before he covered it with a polite smile. I didn't add, "In a house that's actually mine." It sounded ridiculous, even to me. The first time he came over, my mom turned on her brightest hostess voice and grilled him about commissions and benefits. Tom joked that maybe Ethan could talk some sense into me and convince me to apply at his dealership. Chloe rolled her eyes and said, "She's been building a portfolio for like 5 years. It's adorable." I laughed along and apologized later in Ethan's car. He shrugged. "Families are families," he said. But anytime my living situation came up after that, there was a stiffness in his voice. As my client list and savings grew, the comments at home got meaner. If I worked late and skipped dinner, Mom complained she was tired of cooking for a grown-ass woman who can't even come to the table. If I made my own food, she griped that I was eating like a boarder, not family. Tom would whine about the power bill, blaming my machines, then leave sports on all night downstairs. Every month, the $450 left my account, and every month, at least one of them reminded me how lucky I was. They let me stay. I had spreadsheets for everything: client invoices, software expenses, tax projections. One quiet tab at the end was labeled house. In it, I tracked every contribution I'd made since I was 23. After one argument where my mom called me ungrateful because I hadn't emptied the dishwasher fast enough, I sat on my bed and stared at the total at the bottom of that column. Tens of thousands of dollars for a house my grandmother had died to leave to me, a house where my work was a punchline. That was the first time my anger outgrew my guilt. The second time was in a Chili's parking lot. Ethan and I had been together a little over a year when he brought up moving in together. His lease was ending. He said he didn't want to keep telling people his girlfriend lived with her parents. He suggested we get a place near the Strip. I told him I was already helping with expenses at home. And if he wanted to save, maybe we could talk about him moving into the spare room temporarily. He looked at me like I'd suggested we live in a tent. "I'm not moving in with your parents, Erin. That's not normal." I told him quietly that the house was actually mine. Grandma had left it to me. My parents weren't landlords. I'm like, "She's doing you a favor." I didn't like she's doing you a favor. I didn't have an answer that didn't make me look weak. 2 weeks later, after an argument where he said I cared more about comfort than growing up, he broke up with me under the neon glow of that Chili's sign. Said he couldn't see a future with someone still living at home. He drove off. I stood there, thinking about the irony that I owned an entire house and still looked like a dependent to everyone around me. On the drive back to Henderson, I made a decision. I was done renting my own life from people who refused to see it. Back in my room, I opened my laptop, pulled up my spreadsheets, and booked a call with a mortgage broker. When she saw my income and savings, she actually whistled. We talked downtown Vegas studios, quiet complexes, co-working spaces. A few months and a blur of showings and e-signatures later, I had an accepted offer on a small one-bedroom with big windows and a view of the skyline. I didn't say a word to my family until it was done. On closing day, I signed the last document, took the keys, and drove over alone. The place was empty. My footsteps echoed. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel like punishment. It felt like possibility. That night, I drove back to Henderson with a secret. I packed my life into boxes, stacking them by my door, while my mom grumbled about clutter and Tom complained he couldn't get to the garage. I put a moving date on my calendar. They still called my work pretend. They still joked about feeding a 30-year-old. But now, yet every jab bounced off something solid inside me. Soon, they would learn what it meant that my name was on that deed. Moving day itself wasn't dramatic at first. It just felt like any Saturday where everyone woke up already annoyed. I came downstairs with my keys on a ring and said calmly that movers would be arriving in an hour and I'd be out by night. My mom stared at me like I'd said I was joining a cult. "Out where?" she demanded. "I bought a place near downtown," I said. "It's small, but it's mine." She blinked, then laughed this bright, brittle laugh that made my skin crawl. "With what money, Erin? Your pretend jobs?" she said. "You don't even have benefits." Tom, eyes on the TV, grunted that it was about time. I learned what grown-up bills felt like. When he said I'd come crawling back the minute rent and utilities hit at the same time, Chloe wandered in, scrolling her phone, and said, "Wait, you're actually leaving, like, with a truck and everything?" The movers pulled up. There was this shuffle at the front door. Everyone pretending they didn't care, but no one leaving the foyer. They watched my monitors, my chair, my boxes of cables and notebooks go out the door. Mom kept muttering that I'd better remember who kept a roof over my head. Tom joked loud enough for the movers to hear about converting my room into something useful for once. No one asked for my new address. No one said they'd miss me. I did one last walkthrough of my room, ran my fingers along the wall where my grandmother used to lean while she talked to me before bed, then carried out my backpack and a laundry bag. No speech, no slammed doors. Just a quiet goodbye to a house that had never been allowed to feel like mine, even though the records said otherwise. The drive to my new apartment was only 20 minutes. It felt like crossing a continent. Inside, there was a mattress on the floor, a stack of boxes, my laptop, and the city lights outside the window. I set my phone on the counter, ordered cheap Chinese, and spent an hour assembling a flimsy IKEA table while a sitcom played. For the first time in a decade, the silence around me wasn't loaded. I'd half finished my lo mein before I picked up my phone again. I had a flood of notifications. At the top of my Facebook feed was my mom's post, a wine glass, an empty plate, and the caption, "To finally not be feeding a 30-year-old anymore, should have kicked her out sooner. Ain't no more feeding a parasite." Hundreds of likes, reactions flying in. Carla had commented, "Remember when she sobbed over Target at 24, still unemployed and living at home at 30? Lord, give me patience." Tom had shared Michelle's post with his before and after collage, my room mid-move, boxes and clothes everywhere, versus the same room now with a recliner jammed in and a giant TV on a cheap stand. Caption, "From war zone to man cave. Guess we finally got our home back." Chloe had tagged half her feed and written, "Dating tip. If his sister is a full-time gamer at 30, run neighbors, old classmates, distant relatives I barely remembered, all chiming in, laughing, agreeing, joining the pile-on." One notification stung more than I expected. Ethan had reacted with a laughing emoji. No comment, no DM. Just a quiet little endorsement of their story. For a moment, my whole chest went hot. I felt like I'd been stripped in front of the entire town. Then something colder slid into place. All these people were thrilled that the freeloader had finally moved out, like my parents had been martyrs for feeding me. Not one of them knew I'd been wiring $450 a month into that house since I was 23. Not one of them knew the deed had my name on it for years. Not one knew that I was sitting in a condo I'd bought, alone, with money from the same online work they mocked. I scrolled back to the top, took a breath, screenshot of the original post, screenshot of Carla's Target joke, screenshot of Tom's man cave share, screenshot of Chloe's dating tip. I saved the names, the timestamps, the reactions, and my name next to the property address, my name next to the property address, receipts on receipts. I could have unloaded everything right there, quote, shared mom's post with the documents attached and blown up their comment section. My fingers hovered over the write a comment box. Anger is one thing, strategy is another. Instead, I closed the app and set a reminder on my calendar for 12 days later. Let them think they'd finally gotten rid of their parasite. When I answered, it wouldn't be in their comment thread. It would be on my terms. 12 days sounds random, but it was long enough for the joke to settle into the culture. At first, people just reacted. Os, Tostin, same, and pig gifs. By day 12, it had become a local in-joke. People in Henderson I hadn't seen in years were referencing it on their own posts about kids who won't grow up. My mom had pinned it to the top of her profile. That morning, my reminder buzzed while I was making coffee. I opened Facebook. Her post was still there, still pinned, still full of strangers who thought they knew my entire life from a caption. I read through it one more time, not to hurt myself, but to make sure I understood exactly what they were claiming. Then I opened my laptop. I didn't start my post with a rant. I started with their evidence. The first image was a cropped screenshot of my mom's status. Same words, same reaction count, same comments visible. Above it, and I wrote, "This is my mother celebrating that her 30-year-old daughter finally moved out after sponging off them for years." The next image, a scan of my grandmother's will with everything redacted except one clean line. Sole owner of the property located at address. Name, Erin Marie Lawson. I highlighted it in yellow. Caption, that property is the house my parents live in. My grandmother, a retired postal worker who paid it off herself, left it to me when I was 23 because she did not trust my stepdad with money. Then I added a screenshot from my banking app. Numbers and dates visible, but account details blurred. 7 straight years of monthly transfers labeled house $450, the total at the bottom. I've been paying rent, $450 every month, into a mortgage-free house that is legally mine, where while my parents live there without making a mortgage payment. After that came a blurred client dashboard, names and logos hidden, columns of payments clear, my yearly income as a freelance web designer and digital marketer lined up month by month. It's not bragging, I wrote. It's proof that the unemployed gamer they described has been making a full-time income from the work they mocked as pretend. Then I tied it together. The parasite in my mom's post bought her own apartment in Las Vegas with her income from the same online work my family ridiculed. The room my stepdad turned into a man cave overnight. It's in a house he has never paid a mortgage on. If you're going to drag your own kid on the internet for likes, at least make sure you don't live under their roof. I hovered over post for a long second. I thought about my grandmother's hands, cracked from decades of sorting letters, about every time my mom had rolled her eyes when I mentioned a client, about Chloe's jokes, Tom's rules. Then I thought about all the people sitting in their childhood bedrooms, building careers no one around them took seriously. I clicked post. At first, nothing huge happened. A few friends reacted. A couple of design mutuals commented, "Holy shit, and I'm so sorry." Then a small account that shares freelancer horror stories shared my post with the caption, "This is why so many of us keep our wins quiet." That pulled in their followers. Then a women in tech group picked it up. Then a Nevada meme page. My notifications started to look like a slot machine. My phone buzzed itself off the counter. Comments poured in from strangers who sounded like me. The people whose parents called their art, coding, YouTube channels, or Etsy shops fake work while cashing checks from them. Some were furious on my behalf. Others were just relieved someone had typed the thing they'd been choking on for years. And then, predictably, it reached home. I didn't need to watch my mom find it to know the minute she did. First came a text, "Call me, now." Then, "This isn't funny, Erin." Then a missed call, then 3 more, then a voicemail. I didn't listen to any of them. Tom texted that I was making the family look bad and that we needed to handle this like adults, not drama queens online. Chloe's messages started with, "What are you doing?" and quickly shifted to, "You're taking this way too far. We're family." He has wanted this kind of spectacle, conveniently forgetting the years she spent turning my Target rejection into dinner theater. I put my phone on silent and watched the little red dots multiply. Meanwhile, my post was doing laps. Someone from our neighborhood group shared screenshots and wrote, "I always thought that Parasite post was harsh. I had no idea." A girl I went to high school with commented that she wasn't surprised and that my mom always loved attention more than accuracy. People clicked through to my mom's profile, saw her pinned post, saw Tom's man cave brag, saw Chloe's dating tip. Screenshots started circulating independently of me. For years, when my family had believed they owned the story because they were the loudest voices at the table, in a few hours, the volume flipped. I don't think public shaming is automatically righteous. My stomach twisted watching it unfold. But there was also a bitter satisfaction in seeing people finally call out the behavior I'd been swallowing since my early 20s. And up to that point, all I'd exposed were the basics: who legally owned the house, who'd actually been paying into it, and who had mocked whom. I hadn't even used the biggest piece of leverage I had, the fact that I wasn't just their daughter, I was their landlord. The real fallout started within days. 2 mornings after I posted, I woke up to 3 missed calls from my mom and a text from Chloe. "You really need to talk to them." Wait, this is out of control. When I finally checked Facebook, my post had been copied into a Las Vegas community group. From there, it spread into neighborhood chats, then into a private staff group at the dental clinic where my mom worked reception. One patient apparently came in, looked straight at her and said, "Are you the mom who called her own kid a parasite on Facebook?" in front of a full waiting room. My mom called after that, sobbing, furious, saying I had ruined her life over one stupid joke. At Tom's warehouse job, someone showed his man cave share to a supervisor. It wasn't a policy violation, but suddenly his reputation, always borrowing, always broke, made a lot more sense to people. Coworkers he owed money to started making comments. "Crazy how your landlord's your stepdaughter, huh? When are you paying us back?" His boss pulled him into the office and said they didn't appreciate being dragged into online drama. A week later, his hours were cut. The quarterly bonus he'd been counting on to patch his credit card bill, gone. Chloe got hit at work, too. She did HR for a logistics company that liked to brand itself as values-driven. A coworker recognized her name in my post and sent it to her manager. She told me later she had to sit through a meeting where her boss asked why she was publicly mocking gamers and piling onto a family dog pile. They put a formal note in her file about unprofessional conduct on public platforms. Suddenly, none of them thought Facebook was just for jokes. That's when I made my next move. I printed a copy of my grandmother's will and highlighted the line naming me as sole owner of the Henderson house. I printed my house as spreadsheet showing 7 years of payments. Then I called the county recorder's office just to confirm what I already knew. The deed was in my name and mine alone. I asked what it took to sell. Answer: less drama than my living room had seen on a random Tuesday. Then I emailed my family. The subject line: regarding Henderson property. The tone: pure landlord. I explained briefly that as the legal owner of the house they lived in, I saw 2 paths. We formalize a rental arrangement. That meant a written lease at market rate, due dates, deposits. They'd take over all utilities and full responsibility for upkeep. I list the house for sale. They'd have a clear move-out date based on whatever closing timeline my agent and I secured. I attached a copy of the deed with my name on it. They had 30 days to respond in writing. My phone lit up almost immediately. My mom called first, half crying, half yelling, demanding how I could do this after all she'd sacrificed. Tom texted a rant about blood being thicker than water and how I was evicting them like strangers. Chloe's message was different. Can we talk? Just us? No yelling, somewhere neutral? We met at a chain restaurant off the highway, the kind with sticky menus and fluorescent lighting. They were already in a booth when I walked in. Mom with red-rimmed eyes, Tom scowling into his soda, Chloe staring at her napkin. For a few minutes, no one spoke. Then my mom launched into a familiar speech, how hard she'd worked, how the internet didn't need to know our business, how that post was just venting. Every few sentences, she looped back to her embarrassment at work. Tom cut in, lecturing me about loyalty, about how real families keep things private, as if I hadn't spent 7 years trying to. When they finally ran out of steam, I put my folder on the table and opened it to the highlighted line in the will. I slid it toward them. I reminded them that this wasn't my decision out of nowhere. It was my grandmother's, the woman who had chosen, deliberately, to put the house in my name because she didn't trust Tom with it. I pointed out that I'd paid them over $35,000 in contributions since I was 23, on top of covering my own expenses. I said quietly that if we were going to talk about doing things to family, maybe we should start with how comfortable they'd been mocking me in public while living in my asset rent-free. Chloe spoke up then, voice small. She admitted she'd known, vaguely, about the will, but had never thought about what it meant. She said joining in the jokes was easier than being the one to say, "Hey, that's not cool." She told me she'd deleted her post and locked her profile after my thread went viral. She apologized, really apologized for the first time. My mom sniffed and said that didn't fix the humiliation. Tom muttered that the guys at work would never let him live this down. I told them the humiliation they were feeling now was a fraction of what I'd felt watching my own family paint me as a leech to hundreds of people while I scrolled their posts from the floor of an apartment I'd paid for myself. Then I steered back to logistics. I said I wasn't interested in being their invisible landlord anymore. Either we had a proper tenant-landlord relationship or we didn't have one at all. They had 30 days. Mom cried that they couldn't afford full rent now that Tom's hours were cut. Tom blustered that they'd fight this if they had to. But the way his eyes kept dropping to the highlighted will told me he knew exactly how that would end. Chloe asked if I'd really sell the house Grandma had loved. That one hurt. I told her I'd thought about it more than anything else in my life. And keeping the house on the current terms felt like keeping myself small forever. Selling it and using the money to grow the business Grandma always bragged about to her friends. That felt more like honoring her than letting her hard work fund Tom's man cave. We went in circles for another hour. Guilt, bargaining, accusations, all the familiar plays. None of it changed the math. 30 days later, they didn't have a lease proposal. They couldn't match even a discounted market rent. They packed up their own cardboard boxes, borrowed trucks from friends, and moved into a smaller rental in a further out suburb they could actually afford. The day after they left, I signed a listing agreement. A month and a half after that, standing in yet another beige office, I signed away the Henderson house. The number from the sale hit my account that afternoon. It was more money than I'd ever seen in one place. Years of my grandmother's labor, years of my own, finally under my control. The house was gone. So was the version of me who stayed quiet while everyone else laughed. I didn't celebrate by buying a sports car or a closet full of luxury brands. The first thing I bought was a real desk. Solid wood, no wobble. I sat it by the window in my apartment and turned that wall into my command center. Then I leased a tiny office downtown. 2 rooms above a nail salon with dusty blinds and good light. I ordered a cheap sign for the door. Lawson Digital Studio. A month later, a client walked up those stairs, shook my hand, and looked around at the mood boards and mock-ups I'd pinned to the walls. "So, this is where the magic happens," he said, when I'd been doing the same work in a messy bedroom for years. Now it finally looked like work to other people too. With the cushion from the house sale, I could turn down nightmare clients. I could bring on a part-time assistant, a college sophomore whose parents called design a cute hobby. I paid her fairly, put her name on deliverables, made it clear she never had to apologize for working from a laptop. My story didn't stay contained to Facebook. Someone posted a summary on Reddit. It made its way into a couple of TikToks and a podcast episode about adult children and housing. Sometimes I'd be scrolling and hear a paraphrased version of my own thread in someone else's rant. Every time it resurfaced, I got a bump of followers and a new batch of DMs. Some were angry, usually from people who sounded suspiciously like my mom. Others were from people who had lived my life beat for beat, doing remote work from childhood bedrooms while hearing that they didn't have a real job. I responded to as many as I could without turning my entire life into unpaid therapy. I told them what I wish someone had told me at 23. You are allowed to have boundaries with your family. They gave you life is not a lifetime pass to treat you like you owe them everything. Work that happens on a screen is still work. My own family didn't disappear. Michelle and Tom ended up in a small 2-bedroom in a cheaper development. Tom bounced between temp gigs before landing on overnight delivery driving. Mom kept her job at the dental clinic but never got her extra hours back. The whispers died down. The bruise didn't. For a long time, we barely spoke. Birthdays were reduced to a 2-word text, or nothing at all. It would be easy to say that felt amazing. Clean. It didn't. Grief is messy, even when you were the one who handed over the keys. I miss the version of my mom who braided my hair before 1st grade, the version of Tom who grilled burgers in the backyard and taught me how to change a tire. Missing who people were doesn't mean you owe yourself to who they are now. Chloe was the first bridge back. She came by my office one afternoon, hovering awkwardly in the doorway in a blazer that didn't quite fit. She scanned the room, the equipment, the whiteboard full of deadlines, my name on the door. "This is real," she said. We sat on my thrift store couch. She apologized again, not just for the Facebook comment, but for all the times she'd sided with the loudest voices instead of the truest one. She told me my post had forced her to see herself the way strangers saw her screenshots. We're not suddenly best friends, but we text. She sends me HR articles she thinks might help my interns. I send her job postings when she talks about wanting out of her company. It's small, it's honest. The rest of my family still thinks I went too far. Maybe they always will. I've stopped trying to convince them. I didn't tell the story so the internet would cheer when my parents struggled to pay rent. I told it because for years, their version of me was the only one anyone heard, even in my own head. Putting our story online wasn't about vengeance for its own sake. It was about putting the facts next to the punchline and letting people decide which mattered more. Like, the lesson isn't drag your family the first time they hurt you. The lesson is humiliation has a cost, especially when it comes from the people who are supposed to protect you. Treating your kids' work like a joke because it doesn't look like yours has a cost. Years of just kidding insults add up. One day, the lazy kid might be the one signing the papers that decide where you sleep. If you see yourself in my story, hear this. You're not wrong for wanting respect in your own home. You're not dramatic for feeling gutted when your life becomes someone else's content. There's a difference between forgiving and pretending nothing happened. You can love your family and still say, "This is as close as you get to me now. That's not betrayal. That's self-respect." My mom wanted her Facebook post to be the final punchline of my adulthood, and instead, it became the opening scene of a different story. One where I stopped playing the role of the ungrateful child and started living like the owner of my own life. The internet didn't fix my family. It didn't make everything fair. But it did one thing I needed. It made the people who were so proud to shame me in public sit for once in the full light of what they'd done. For me, that was enough to finally walk away from the house I left behind without looking back.